Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, welcome to this week's episode. Sorry, I'm gagging. Welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. I'm here with Thos. Hello, Thos.
I do have that effect on an awful lot of people. I like to start the show with a gag, and I see that you've done it literally this time. Hello, Nick.
My reflex is wonderful. Hello, how are you?
I'm tolerable.
Yes.
So I found.
I agree. We're going to talk about some shows that... A couple of weeks ago, we talked about shows that I've seen. We've since talked a lot about Oklahoma, which obviously had a big impact on your life. But you've seen other shows as well, haven't you?
Yes, this is really just a little bit like yours, a sort of gallop through some of the musicals which have sort of landed on my lap in the last few months. And the one I'd like to start with is actually one that you've spoken about already on Musical Talk in the past, and that's Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Mm-hmm. Now, Bedknobs and Broomsticks didn't come to London.
No.
It wasn't.
It might.
Yes, and I think it probably deserves to.
Yeah. I mean, of course, at the time of recording, we don't know what has been announced.
We know nothing.
We know nothing.
Yes. But it's really interesting. It was a show because I like Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Bedknobs and Broomsticks as a film is one of the great Disney films for me. Now, I'm not so stupid as to realise it's nothing like Mary Poppins in terms of its success, although it's clearly a kind of conceptual sequel. But for me, of my age group, it was one of those ones that came out when I was a little boy and was repeated enough in the 70s in half-term and school holidays, which is the way Disney, before the age of videos, Disney always re-released films during the school holidays. And you went along to the cinema with auntie and uncle or whoever was taking you. And so I got to see Bedknobs and Broomsticks a number of times, and it had several sequences which were pulled out in the television programme called Disney Time. Disney Time might be a little early for you, but every bank holiday in Britain, a celebrity who was known to children would host, and it'd be a different one each time, something called Disney Time. And for half an hour or 45 minutes, they would introduce to you a clip from Film X, a clip from
Sell
Film
you
Y,
the latest product is what you're trying to say.
but also sell you the oldest product.
Okay.
They kept Disney in the
Archive.
mind of children because, this is the time before videos. You couldn't, if you didn't go to the cinema to see it when it was re-released, you didn't see it. And it might be 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 years before that film was going to come out again. Not least because, as we've said before, Disney carry on making new musicals, so they had to make slots for their new shows as well as revive their old ones. But Bedknobs and Broomsticks, which in Britain, of course, has a particular resonance because it's got a British star, it's a British story. Once again, it has all these parallels with Mary Poppins. But it was just one of my favourites, and they often showed... under the, bobbing along at the bottom of the beautiful briny sea. There's a lovely piece of alliteration for you. Beautiful song as well, which I understand was actually created for Mary Poppins and held over and then used in this instead, but is magnificent. And the other scene they always showed, of which we'll talk in a minute, was the famous violent football match on the island at the end. With David Tomlinson as the referee who gets very severely bashed. And it's a comic tour de force.
Well, it's lovely having David Tomlinson do that part because it's so different to Mr. Banks.
Entirely.
For Mary Poppins. And it's so nice to see him do...
He's showing his range.
Quite near, I guess, the time frame, doing two very different things.
But what he has the magic gift of being affable. Affability is David Tomlinson's big hallmark, and you see why Disney wanted to use him again. And he's a lovely actor. You warm. I warmed to him as a boy, and I warmed to him as an adult. But those are the two scenes which really stick out and live in the memory. And it's a film that I've stayed with me all the way through. Now I'm 112. So
B cup.
So when I heard that Bedknobs and Broomsticks was going to be turned into a musical with a British premiere. It was coming round here first. I thought, I'll have a slice of that. So I worked out where I could see it, and I went down to see it at the Mayflower Theatre in Southampton, which is an enormous venue.
I went to the Woking one, which is a lot nearer.
Yes.
Or Bromley or somewhere.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It was Woking, actually, I saw it.
But we both have to travel for it. It's interesting.
Yes.
So the shows we were keen enough to go and see.
I got on my bed.
And touched your... Do you want me to rub my knob? As I believe the child in the film says, rather unfortunately. It's terrible, really, isn't it? But there we are. Hey, it was a different time.
Yep.
But the...
So you went to...
So I travelled to Southampton.
Yeah.
And I don't regret it at all. But it was a very interesting experience because obviously I've never seen any other version but the film because that's the only version available until this. And I thought, oh, crikey. And I'm giving you I'm going to be absolutely honest with you. I was very, very impressed by the rewriting and the contextualization, and yet at the same time, I couldn't help but wonder if perhaps it's lost a little bit of the magic in the process. And I'll explain what I mean. The very opening scene takes place with the three children. They're not the bank's children. That's a different family. The three children in their house in London, presumably the East End or something like that, and their parents. And it immediately opens out into this figurative sequence, but a sequence nonetheless of the Blitz, and their house being literally rent asunder, and then the parents don't come back, and it is very clear that they are now orphans, or certainly that is the interpretation. Now, that is a strong opening, and that's a very strong opening if the show is still being marketed for children. And it still is, like a good Disney show. It's a family show. Adults can enjoy it. Children can enjoy it. Now, people are more sophisticated these days than they were when I was a boy, but that still struck me as very powerful and perhaps a little traumatic.
It's also very British, I think.
Go on.
To put tragedy at the heart of something. It's very Harry Potter, it's very fairy tale, it's very Roald Dahl, it's very kind of unlike the American way of doing it, which will be let's gloss over that and let's just get on with the fun action
or perhaps
stuff.
Make the tragedy the point of the plot later on. Actually, I wouldn't say they gloss over it. I think they focus in a different way on what. Yeah, it's about I suppose it's that difference between bringing discord to an idyll, whereas in this case we start with the discord.
but also it humanises the story.
It does. I accept all of that, but it's still a big pill to take at the very opening of a show.
Then you get the end, which is a completely different.
Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. So we have this odd situation whereby we've started with that, and then you see the children who are essentially shell-shocked. They are certainly traumatised, as they would be, on the train travelling down to, I think Corfe Castle is still in the background, so it's somewhere in Devon, and where they are evacuees. And of course, it also explains why they are not really mingling. They look destroyed, these children, and they are passive. They're terribly passive, particularly as they're sort of at the beginning when they're being allocated by the local postmistress to various who's going to get them, and eventually they sort of end up with Eglantine. So that reimagines that opening sequence and setup in a very dark, painful
way,
sad way. Yeah, it's very sad.
Well, it's based on a novel, though, isn't it?
I'm sure it is.
Do we know anything about
I've never read it.
The way the novels were introduced, or
no?
Be interesting to see if they.
It would, yeah.
Did the same.
I know nothing about.
But that's what's great about when you look at something like that show. You're able to say the film, the piece. You're able to say, what can we do to make this a better story?
But, well, here's the interesting thing. You see, I do think it's very clever, and I can see absolutely why they've done it. But I'm still concerned, potentially, that the show ended up being too clever, because you then... Well, I want to carry on with the description of it and then explain why, cumulatively, some of these ideas were all super clever and added up to a very nice intellectual whole, but I can't help but wonder if that intellectual whole...
It's necessary.
No, I really like the intelligence.
You like an intellectual whole.
I like the I think it has an intellectual uplift on the film, but I do think it loses some charm, and I think it loses some heart in that process.
Pathos.
No, it's got pathos.
And I will when you leave.
Very good. Seriously though, and then we get Eglantine, who is magnificent. I bought into her from the moment she arrived. She, if you can't have Angela Lansbury, then have this.
Yes,
I've forgotten the name.
Diana. Someone. I shall look it up whilst you carry on rambling.
Yeah. I will say that she was magnificent, and she completely caught me and won me over from the very first moment we met her. And I was delighted by her and her journey, her beats, her thoughts, her sharpness when it needed to be sharpness, but clearly, once again, a very decent person. Everything about her was good.
Diane Pilkington plays her, and my friend Charlie Brunton plays Emilus Brown.
Now that's interesting because he's reconsidered more than in the film. We were talking about...
reconceived or reconsidered?
reconsidered.
Okay.
Because he's much more of a... You see, I think in the film, David Tomlinson plays Brown as a rogue, but not a crook. Obviously, in this, he's much more, not a crook, but he's light-fingered at least. He's much more on the side of breaking the law, or at least bending the rules. And I have to say there's an element of light-fingeredness in him. He's not afraid, he's the man. I can see this one in the stage version looting a building. If he finds it empty, I don't think I could find David Tomlinson's character looting a building. He's much more...
Do you think that's because you have an affinity for David Tomlinson?
I do have an affinity for David Tomlinson. So I'm not in any way criticising the performance. I'm not actually criticising the rewrite, because it works for the plot, once again. But once again, I think it just takes the charm level down a spot, because he is actually a slightly more morally ambiguous character than Brown is in the film.
He's a bit Fagin-y, isn't he?
He is a bit Fagin-y. There's nothing wrong with Fagin. Fagin's a great character, a great archetype, and he has musical theatre legs. But I thought that Brown, because he'd been reworked, once again, he'd been just turned on a tilt slightly, like the story. It worked better and more tightly, but at a small expense of charm. And the problem is, I think we've got all these little aggregates. This bit's just a little bit less charming. This bit's just a little less charming.
Can I ask you this? I will admit I've never seen the film. So I went in...
Sorry, I haven't finished. I have now finished.
So I went in... This is a new musical for me.
Yes.
I knew some of the songs, obviously, but I didn't really know the plot. I went with Jonathan, which was lovely, as he does know the film, so we were able to kind of talk about it. How would you feel... Put yourself in my shoes. Be careful, because they're much bigger than your feet. How would you feel? Put the film out of your head, and how would you feel if it were just... If this were your Bed Knobs and Broomsticks?
Well, this is the point. And funny enough, you've actually preempted where I'm going with this. So I'm going to make one more point before I answer that question. But by making this point, I think we'll be able to answer that question. Which takes us through. We get the beautiful briny sea. It's not animated, but that's fine. I don't want it to be animated. I'm in a theatre. I'm very delighted to see it done the way it's done. What I was really...
With puppets.
Yeah, but that's perfectly standard. Yeah. And that's, and it was charming.
It's theatre.
Yeah, it was exactly right. I mean, they retweaked it again slightly. There was a competition which made the plot move along, which isn't what you get in the film, but that's not a problem. What I was really looking forward to was seeing how they were going to do the football match. And the answer is...
They don't.
They don't do the football match. And I was slightly disappointed by that. Now, what we got was some magnificent puppet performances.
It's a dance or something, isn't it? I seem to remember. It's been a while since I saw the shows.
Well, we're in the court of the king, who's a lion.
Of King Caractacus.
No, that's something entirely different. The scintillating stitches upon on the bridges, but we'll move on from that.
Just passed by.
So there's this, a life size, well, I say human size king puppet of a lion as a king. There's the ostrich courtier, and all the characters from the film are there, and presumably from the book. And it's all done by Brown's sleight of hand, basically. He steals what he needs to steal, and it's done by, it's a farcical backwards and forwards where they outwit the king and his court. And it's fine. And if in terms of its theatricality, the performances, the puppets, they work very, very well. But, and hear me again, just slightly less charming than the comedy football match, and less funny. I must say, much less funny.
I mean, Jonathan said the football match was just...
It is. It's one of the...
Screaming with laughter.
It's a tour de force, which is why...
Maybe they thought...
They couldn't do it,
presumably. We can't top this.
No, maybe that's exactly right. And they have found something which is different and works dramatically. And if I had never seen the football match, I think I probably would have been delighted. But I have seen the football match, and therefore, for me, it was such a pity that they couldn't come up with something. And I understand, you can only go so far with theatre. You can only go so far with film. You can only go so far. And they all have their strengths and weaknesses, and you do different things. So this did something different. And then we got to the very end, and then we got the Nazi invasion, which in the film, magic helps dispel the Nazi invasion. I mean, it's all very Dad's Army Nazi invasion in both the film and on the stage. I must say, also getting the entire cast to double up as Nazis, the invading army, was quite fun because the cast were different sizes. They were tall and short and thin and fat, and so there were a lot of German-style trench coats buttoned up very high to hide the fact that people, this was not what I would call a crack troop of SS troops, or if they were, they'd obviously lost the template of the kind of model they were.
They don't refer to the Nazis.
No,
they call them the Shadows or something.
They do, of course, because Nazis is too horrible for the source. But in the film, they're Nazis, and of course, it's the Second World War. So who else is going to be invading Britain in the Second World War? They're not day trippers. They are. It's whoever the country is at war with who's got terribly good tailoring. That really narrows it down. And the sequence does what it needs to do, and you get all the magic, and then the Shadows, start getting the upper hand. And so actually, and then it is solved, but there's this odd, terrible sense that the Nazis are winning at the end of the piece. And then the rug is pulled away, because what we then discover is that actually these 3 traumatised children from the beginning are still in the evacuees depot, if you like, waiting for the postmistress to... so it's all been an enormous imagination based on a book.
And what was your reaction when that happened?
Well, I was surprised, because that's not how the film ends. I was also surprised because at one level, it was all an imaginary dream, is a little bit of a cliche. But what it does allow you to do is very neatly and tidily and cleverly, and we're back to being clever again, mop it up, because Eglantine comes in, and for reasons which are not absolutely clear, Brown turns up as well, although his reason for being there turns out to be a lot weaker. I can't remember why he's there. He's Mr. Train or something. So they all conglomerate in the same place. So the potentiality of the human connection for the children with their surrogate mother and father, because let us be honest, that's what we're now being offered, and the creation of a new family on the wreckage of the old, is potentialised.
Did you get the visual reference when the gates slide at the end of the show together? There's a picture of a family that's formed at the top of the gate, and it's there. I didn't notice it. Did you notice it?
No, I didn't. I mean, I twigged anyway that we were saying, look, here's a proto-nuclear family being created in front of our eyes. I didn't need that clue. I can understand why it was there. I didn't spot it at all, I must say.
The theatrical person in me was expecting that motorcycle to fly off at the end of the show.
Which would have been lovely, because that would have hinted that magic was still potentially possible.
Yes.
Yeah. So I came away, and there was, by the way, there were some other things I really liked about it. I liked the fact that the eldest son was given a little more character. It turns out he's a master negotiator. That was fabulous. And indeed, he's given some of these Sherman-esque songs. And there, some of the songs, with the long imaginary word.
The new songs are brilliant.
They are brilliant, and they fit very nicely, and they work in terms of the plot. So I've got no criticism. I like the score a great deal. I thought it took the best of the old, it added some new, it worked it all together, which is actually pretty much the theme of the piece in terms of the eldest son who does his negotiation. He takes a bit of that, mixes it together with a little bit of flourish, with a flair, as the song goes from the film, and then creates a negotiated settlement. And indeed, the whole thing is about ultimately coming up to what looks like a negotiated settlement. So I really liked it. And it was really clever, and it worked magnificently. But all those intellectual and clever flourishes and improvements and cohesive interconnectivity also worked against the charm quotient. And if they can find a way of just building that up, maybe organically, back in, then I think that they're onto a winner. But I don't think it's quite there yet. So I don't want to damn it. I don't damn it at all. I think it's an intellectual treat. I think it was great to watch. I really like the performances. I like the score. I like the way it looked. I just found that the cleverness needed a little bit more. There needed to be just a little more grease in the machine for me to make that really into something special. What it was good. I'd love it to be special. I think special is within its grasp. I just want to see just a bit more flowering of fun, charm, and where it's possible, happiness. And Eglantine is the main driver of that. And I think if they can find a way of adding in Brown's fun quotient, then they've probably got the balance, in my opinion.
I like the magic. I like the flying bed.
Well, you always would.
Yes, I thought the flying stuff was excellent for a touring show.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see what they do if and when it plonks itself into town.
Well, I hope it does.
Yeah.
I really hope it comes to London. I'd like to see it again. I was impressed enough by it. The potentiality is all there.
Potentiality sounds like a Sherman Brothers
It does indeed.
song.
Potentially locomotion.
Yes. Supercalifragilistic. But I'm going to play a tiny... there's a theme park song they did called There's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow. So
after all, it's a step in the right
there's
direction.
a song I just played Thos called There's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow shining at the end of every day. And I sat there during Bed Knobs and Broomsticks during the song Take a Step In or whatever it is.
Yeah. After all, it's a step in the right direction.
And I thought, I've heard this before. And that's, just the Sherman Brothers, isn't it? That they do what they do very well.
Do you know? Yeah, it's interesting. It's easy to dismiss the Sherman Brothers as doing what they do very well in a narrow range. And
they're incredibly.
Yeah, exactly. They are. The trick is, it sounds like it's in a narrow range. And do you know? The great thing about their stuff is, and you can see that one of them was an Anglophile, because their stuff there's a lot of marches, and a lot of their
Music
stuff
hall.
is on the beat. Music hall, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The thing about the Sherman Brothers is they are the most American and at the same time the most British composers, and I can absolutely see why they were always plopped onto. Every time the Disney Corporation, or sometimes Walt Disney when he was still alive, said, "I tell you what, let's make a film set in London, ye olde London." Let's get the Sherman Brothers in because they know how to do it.
What was The Happiest Millionaire? Was that one as well?
I don't
Set
know
in
that.
London? Because it had Michael Crawford in it, I think. Or am I getting that completely wrong? I don't know.
It's not ringing any bells.
This is more Dom's territory. He knows the weird 60s films that no one's ever heard of. But yes, that's
So Bed Knobs and Broomsticks, excellent. And if there's a chance to see it, go and see it.
I'm
But
hearing
I'd love to hear
rumours that it
polish.
might fly into the Novello Theatre, which
Well, there is a theatre with that name, so it's not impossible.
where a certain Dear Evan Hansen is playing, and that will close soon,
it
which
is
brings us
closing
neatly
soon.
on to our next show to
What a
discuss.
segue. Now, Dear Evan Hansen, it's an interesting piece. It's not the kind of thing I would have naturally have ever gone to see. But when it first opened, pre-COVID, ladies and gentlemen, thousands of years ago, in London.
It was the big show, wasn't
Yes,
it?
it was. It was an enormous show. There was word of mouth. And a friend of mine invited me to see it. And she said, I've got an extra ticket. I'd love you to come and see it with me. So I saw it within the first few weeks. And I thought to myself, oh, now this is a curious piece. I'd never seen the film. I knew nothing about it. So I was coming into it
Film wasn't out when
absolutely
you saw
fresh.
it.
Oh, well, wasn't it? There you are.
No.
So this was a musical first. Right. You see, I didn't know that. Now,
Well, book first, and then a musical,
right,
then a film, then a
so
T-shirt.
I have not seen any of the...
Soon a ride, probably.
Yes, I've not seen any of its earlier versions in any incarnation. So I went in, and I'm not going to talk about the plot per se, but I remember a very strong sense of discomfort in it, because there are some dark themes here. I said I wasn't going to talk about the plot, but it's not a spoiler to say that very early on, a character commits suicide.
Well, I remember because I went in knowing nothing about it as well, so I went on my own to see it one night because I thought once I'll see what all the fuss is about. And the bit where the kind of story turns, when the letter is in the hands of the wrong, I internally laughed.
Did you?
Because to me it sounds like the setup of a farce.
Well, it could easily be a farce, but the other thing is it could also be a proper psychological thriller. And
It's neither of those.
well, it's not enough. No, it really isn't. It's neither fish nor fowl in some senses. So the interesting thing for me was that I watched it avidly, drawing in all the clues and cues being offered to me, and I got to the interval, and the Evan Hansen character is interesting. He's quite psychologically well drawn for the most part. He's looking for a father figure. He's looking for stability. He's looking for popularity. There are things, and you can sort of see he doesn't do anything that's bad per se, or rather he does, but he's it's a gradual journey down a path. Every step is understandable, and it really pushes you in a direction. And that Act 1, in that sense, is very well written. And I got to the interval, and I thought, this is going to end
What's going to happen in
badly.
Act 2? Yeah.
Yeah, I thought, oh my God, this looks like a trajectory of this is going to get... He's going to go further and further down the path.
It's like a tragedy with a few
until
more letters.
Yeah, and he won't be able to get back. And then his only solution will be suicide. And I thought, oh my God, I've come into a musical where we start with a suicide and the main character could very easily commit suicide at the end of Act 2 and finish the piece.
And then it all gets a bit soppy, doesn't it?
Well, then it pulls its punches. Yes, it does get soppy and it gets sloppy, in my opinion. Or rather, it loses its nerve. It's actually, there's a really good story just under the surface, quite a long way in. And it's like they don't know how to solve the problem, because actually, in my opinion, the natural trajectory that I cast for Evan, if it's not suicide, it's punishment. There's got to be some payoff. And
I remember actually saying, because the person I was sitting next to was on his own as well, and I said to him, Act 2 is going to be really interesting. He has to get his comeuppance of what he's done, because he's not. And the film has really harmed the musical's reputation, which is we can talk about that as well, but he's not a likeable character.
In the film? Or in the play?
If you've seen the film, you realise he's not likeable in the play, musical.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And it has harmed, because the film was,
And I remember.
as bad as Cats.
In real life.
And I think the film is partly responsible for the show's closure. I think COVID is responsible for the show's closure.
There's a number of reasons, but I agree with you. I think that I was expecting the show to last a bit longer, in London at least. So, but in Act 2, it pulls its punches. It sort of builds up to a climax, which it then never delivers. That's the point. You feel, and I felt suckered by that. I felt, oh my God, it's taken me down this path. It's taken Evan down this path. Sorry, so if you haven't seen it, I'm going to have to tell you this element of the plot, which I found ridiculous and terrible. Because of his actions and he's got so caught up in this world he's created, which is all based on lies, even with the good intentions,
Can you explain briefly what does happen?
Right, okay. In a nutshell, so this is a very basic thing. The plot of this is that for whatever reason, someone he is at school with who is not a friend commits suicide. And Evan is in a position to help, he thinks, alleviate the suffering of the parents of the boy who commits suicide by pretending that they were friends and then producing artifacts.
Because Evan Hansen writes a letter to himself every day.
Which is part of his psychotherapy. Yeah. But the letters are then reinterpreted as being from Connor.
Which is a bit I found, this is a farce setup.
I didn't actually have, I see the point, and you could go off in that direction. I bought that. It was no trouble at all, and it set the plot going. And then the problem is the family are they're looking for a new son. He comes from and
he's in love with the bully's sister,
he grows to love the bully's sister, and that's what drives most of Act 2. And I think is deemed to be the punishment, because they don't get together in the end, because at the end, the house of cards tumbles, because he loses control of it, because he wants more, and it makes him popular. He's got friends, he's got people feeling sorry for him, he's got a new family, essentially. Suddenly, all the things he's wanted are happening for him, but it's all based on lies. It gets bigger and bigger, he loses control, it goes pop.
It's almost like Little Shop of Horrors, the kind of Greek, the Faust story.
It's a tragedy in that sense. But here's the point. What is the payoff? What is his suffering? Right, he doesn't get the girl. Big deal. Doesn't deserve the girl, frankly. But it's not a big screaming punch up at the end, as it were. He is revealed for what he's done. He has to fess up. The family are devastated. That by this stage, they are being vilified on social media and beyond. And it relies on them being a marvellous family, which of course they are, in many ways, by not dobbing him in it. So they accept the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, which are being slung their way in order to save Evan. So actually the family, who are punished at the beginning with the death, who are punished with lies, who are punished with being publicly criticised and chastised and threatened because of something that wasn't the case, i.e. these set of lies, then also take the bullet for Evan. They are an unimpeachable family in this, in my view, and Evan is not himself evil. That is his interesting characteristic, but he has done bad things. And then we cut to 6 months later for a kind of sort of bittersweet re-meeting between him and his ex-girlfriend, as it were, the Connor's sister. And it's this lame bit about, it's very kind of your family not to dob me, essentially. And that's more or less it. And you think, you've got away with that, Evan Hansen. Now, you may be a wiser, happier man, or at least a wiser man. that family has been put through the ringer so many times. I don't know how they've coped. Good luck for them. You know, the heroes of this are the parents and the sister, you know, the family, it seems. It's really... I don't want Evan to be punished for any bloodletting reasons, but it's difficult to see how he is redeemed. I don't see, apart from getting away with it and being a bit sad, because he's not a horrible man, but you know, he's given he walks off melancholy at the end, and that is the extent of it.
Why did you? Because you've seen it twice,
I have,
which I'm most shocked by. Was that a choice of yours to get a better understanding of it?
Well, that's exactly right, because I was so dissatisfied with it the first time, but didn't hate it. I never hated it, but I was dissatisfied.
You wanted to work it out.
What am I missing? And what I'd realised I was missing was I was missing nothing. Okay. I got it the first time.
You will be found. That's the sentiment the show ends with.
Yeah, and you know, that's interesting. It's also a little bit one note tonally, musically. Once again, the songs are beautiful.
And lyrically.
Yeah, but you know, it's well written, but there's not enough variety. There's only one song where the imaginary Connor is duetting with Evan, which feels in any way different. All the rest are kind of sort of modern folk rock. Fine, although very samey. And then you've got this one number which is different and stands out.
There was the one funny song I remember, which was him and his three friends were singing it early in Act 2. It's been since before COVID since I saw it. It's BC. So I can't really remember much about it, but I remember there was a song that him and the friends or the brother or someone sang.
Is it the one where they're concocting more emails and letters?
I think so.
And then the friend who's actually doing the typing keeps adding rude words? Yeah. Yeah, I think that's actually in Act 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
that is, you're right, it's about the only comic moment in the score. It's odd. There's so much potential. Once again, there's the word of the day. So much potential, so much good in it, but it doesn't quite add up to the sum of its parts. And do you know what I really found interesting? And I will be talking about this, I hope, with the chap I went to see this with, a friend of this programme, Josh Clark. He and I went to see Evan Hansen the second time I went to see it, having seen Be More Chill. Okay. And I'm
very impressed, Thos.
Why do you say that?
Because you're seeing all these musicals with rock instruments.
Well, Be More Chill's fabulous.
Yes.
I mean, it has one weakness, which is the solution is ridiculous about finding a particular discontinued brand of fizzy pop from 30 years ago or whatever it is nonsense. But the tone of it is a lot more...
Michael in the bathroom.
But that's a brilliant song. Yeah. But actually the score is more varied, it's more entertaining. The London production had a marvellous digital set. It was, you know...
Broadway's was better, though.
It wasn't... Sorry?
Broadway's was better, though.
Well, of course, but that doesn't matter. I wasn't at Broadway. Yeah. What I really liked Be More Chill, and I was surprised. It's nothing more than Faust, as is Dear Evan Hansen. You know, it's more overt in Be More Chill because there's a devil-like character, the Squip, whereas in Dear Evan Hansen, there is no character who's a villain and egging anyone on. But basically, Evan he's selling his soul for popularity. Yeah. It's the same journey that the central character in Be More Chill has, but Be More Chill is more rounded, it's cleverer, it pays off by actually showing the loyalty of the ignored friend and the loyalty of the father in a way that actually I don't think in Dear Evan Hansen you get quite the same payoff with other people. It didn't pull its punches. It has a silly ending, but it also ultimately says you can never free yourself of the voice of the devil. You've just got to put it in context with all the other voices in your life and make the right choice. I don't see what Evan's message is. I got away with that. I'll try not to do that again. But do I convince myself that Evan doesn't do that again? I'm not sure. So a less good piece, Evan Hansen, even though it's the speech marks more popular and commercially successful.
Do you think Dear Evan Hansen's time is up?
Well, it's finishing. It's closing.
No, but do you think...
Do you mean culturally?
Yes, because I think it's very much of its era with the social media aspect. And I always say never write a musical set in the modern day, because by the time it gets to be staged, it won't be the modern day. And
yes, by musical theatre terms, the modern day, as Tim Sayward often says, is any time in the last 30 years. Yes. But yes, all right.
I think Pasek and Paul are very talented.
Yes, they are.
I think they've dug themselves a hole with this sound now, because I'd much rather listen to their musical of A Christmas Story, which is full on musical comedy, done very well, than the kind of pop dirge of Dear Evan Hansen, and the lyrics for La La Land weren't particularly great, and they did some of the songs for the Smash TV show that was parodying.
I tell you what, just describing those things, you may or may not like them, but that is versatile and a broad spectrum of songs.
Yes, exactly.
So, yes, clearly talent.
But do you think, will
Dear Evan Hansen be revived in 15 years? That's a very good question.
And is it a piece people want to see after the last 2 years we've been having? 3 years.
Well, I'm going to give you an immediate answer. Funny enough, I think if they hadn't made the film, I think the answer is yes. I think Dear Evan Hansen would probably have run in London for another 5 years.
Okay.
Whether it will be revived, even under those circumstances where they hadn't made the film and it had run in London for 5 years, well, it's more likely to be revived if it had a very long opening period, and we'll never know because COVID has screwed that over. Do I think it's too much of its time? Well, funny enough, no, I wouldn't say I do think so. Unless something significant happens, change. It's because it's an early, in the broadest sense, social media musical, or a
psychoanalysis musical as well. Looking at
to a degree, but I think
or certainly
social media has
certainly
a role
musical
in the plot.
that explores mental health, which we haven't really seen ever. I don't think. I'm sure you can find.
Sure how much does it explore mental health, really?
Well, it's about a main character who is having mental health issues, and I don't think we've seen that on stage.
And he solves them by lying. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the message is.
He's not a likable character, and that's
he's
my issue.
He's much less likable in the film, I agree. Because actually, I don't dislike him on stage. I think he's terribly flawed. I think he's trying to do the right thing. I think he's weak, and he allows him. It's Faust.
It's carried away with his.
It's Faust. Yeah.
What's Faust got to do with it? So, did you enjoy it the second time, or did it annoy you more?
I enjoyed it. No, it didn't annoy me on either occasion, but I was.
Confused.
Well, is that fair? I didn't regret seeing it a second time. Its weaknesses were more obvious to me. And the fact that I'd seen those weaknesses the first time, they were just reiterated. I don't think it's a terrible piece. I think it has all the... But the sadness is it could have been an infinitely brilliant, a much more brilliant piece. It has if they had... My view is, if they had followed through with the story in whatever way they wanted to pay it off, but as long as there was some kind of... I don't think Evan suffers enough to have redemption. I know that's terrible, but I want redemption. I like redemption. I think redemption is a really important thing. And I believe in it. I believe you can forgive people. It doesn't matter whether one's religious or not. The concept of redemption is a really important thing and a really important narrative device. We're expected to redeem him because we're expected to like him, but I don't see him go through the mill enough to earn that redemption. That's my problem with it. It pulls its punch at the end, and it shouldn't. And if it didn't, I would call this one of the great musicals. It isn't.
Okay, but it could be.
It could have been.
Could have been, yeah.
But I want to see their next piece.
Dear Evan Hansen, Love Never Dies. Which moves us neatly onto HMS Pinafore. I can't think of a way of segueing.
The word neat, I think, is doing quite a lot of heavy listing in that. Yeah, well, it's a show I saw. Let us talk about HMS Pinafore briefly. I'm not going to dwell on
heavy listing, that's Pirates of Penzance, surely.
But how many musicals from the 1870s still get revived in London? Not many. This and Pirates of Penzance, basically. I happen to have a secret love of HMS Pinafore.
It's not secret.
I have a very overt love of HMS Pinafore. It is one of my favourite Gilbert and Sullivans. It's obviously no Radical, but I slightly prefer it over Pirates, whereas most people prefer Pirates of Penzance. In London and in Gilbert and Sullivan terms, I think it's quite interesting. It's still great that you can find professional versions of Gilbert and Sullivan. They aren't as common as they used to be per se, but you can still find them. And what I've noticed since, the Gondoliers was an enormous hit in the 80s, the 1980s in London. And the doily cart, even when it closed down, there was a new doily cart for a few years. And of course, the daddy in London for Gilbert and Sullivan for the last 40 years, I suppose, damn it, it's getting on for 40 years, is Jonathan Miller's version of the Mikado at the E&O, which has been in repertoire essentially ever since it opened in 86, something around then, with Eric Idle as Coco. And just briefly, the conceit of that is it's a black and white musical British film. You know, it's the kind of thing you expect Jack Buchanan to go strolling in halfway through with a score by Ivan Novello. That's what it looks like. That's what it's trying to do. It's all very neat and Art Deco and beautiful. They've added 1920s touches. There's tap dancing, which you don't expect. You don't expect enough syncopation in Sullivan to be able to do that, but you can. So that's been the daddy, and that's been on and on. What the E&O hasn't really done, because it's a little bit, you know, there's a bit of snobbishness in the world that Gilbert and Sullivan isn't opera, because it isn't. It's operetta, comic opera. Up until now, they haven't brought anything else into the English National Opera Coliseum sort of world. In the last few years, that's changed. After the film Topsy Turvy by Mike Leigh, the Gilbert and Sullivan biopic and the creation of the Mikado, great film if you've not seen it. It's a great film if you have seen it. It's a great film. They got Mike Leigh, the director of that film, a very famous British film director, and got him to reimagine Pirates of Penzance for the E&O, and it was the first time. So it had taken 35 years before they did a second one, basically. They got Mike Leigh in. It did well because Pirates is also one of the easiest to absorb. It's a very lovely Gilbert and Sullivan. No difficulty in that, and everyone likes the I Am the Very Model of a Modern Major General number, and many of the others. So it's great. Easy to sell, easy to like, easy to do. Mike Leigh, instant good show. And that's now joined the repertoire. And they've obviously thought, hang on a minute, there's a market for Gilbert and Sullivan. I think they did one. I think they did Iolanthe last year, which I didn't get to see, or recently anyway. Can't remember when in the COVID era it was, but there was an Iolanthe which I didn't get to see. But last year, and it was sort of their autumn to early New Year era season, they did HMS Pinafore, and I thought, I'm having.
You mean Christmas?
If you like, yeah, all right. It was December. It was December when I went to see it, and I thought, I'm having a slice of this. I love HMS Pinafore. I did it at school at 17.
Me too.
Did you?
I was 10.
And were you performing, or were you?
I was a little sailor boy, and I also helped design the lighting.
Oh, did you? Right,
yes.
Okay. Well, I wasn't a performer. I was on the stage crew, and it really helped. I was already in love with Gilbert and Sullivan. It really solidified the relationship. But anyway, I thought, I really want to see this. You know, they've got a good track record here. Let's go and see it. Now, the Coliseum, enormous venue, not a cheap venue. You know, the tickets were expensive, I thought, and it's a short show, and
it's often done with another Pirates, isn't it? Or
well, no, not usually, but what they often do is take Trial by Jury, which is a one act, and then sort of beef up the evening. What you weren't getting that here. What you got was a reimagined HMS Pinafore.
Set on a spaceship.
Well, actually, there is.
God.
There is a fairly famous adaptation of HMS Pinafore called Spaceship Pinafore, which is basically on the I don't know what you call it, the main room of the Starship Enterprise. That's the concept. It's a kind of Star Trek version of Pinafore. So you haven't had any new idea there, Nicholas. But taking us to the point,
I thought I would have an idea, and then I didn't.
But the thing here is that actually what they've done, they beefed it up a bit, or rather padded it out by adding new material. So the Gilbert was all there, the Sullivan was all there, but what they did was they added
put
extra
Gilbert
scenes.
O'Sullivan songs in, and
Oh no, I like Gilbert O'Sullivan as it happens, but it's not a match. They added new scenes, new comedy scenes, mostly throwaway stuff. There was a lot of.
So when you say they, who?
Well,
did they
presumably
get
the production team.
A sketch writer in, or
I don't know how it came about, but whoever produced or directed
Joan Littlewood turn up and get them to improvise.
Wouldn't have thought that Joan Littlewood and Gilbert and Sullivan were a natural match. And also, what with her being dead. But what I mean is, there were scenes. There was a lot of scenes in Captain Corcoran's sort of study, where he's trying continually.
He's Captain Kirk, which is in Star Trek.
But Captain Corcoran is trying to get fondant fancy, and every time he's trying to put it in his mouth, he gets a shock and he drops it on the stage. There was some good business. There's a marvellous bit where Buttercup falls in the sea.
Okay.
And Captain Corcoran, who's in love with her, doesn't dive in to save her. He just sort of mimes how to swim to her, which gives, gets. There was lots of laughs in the business, but in the scripted text, which was added to Gilbert, and I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think it was less good than Gilbert. Problem is, if you're going to do Gilbert, you have to be as good as Gilbert. A lot of people take out Gilbert lyrics and rewrite them themselves, almost always badly. They didn't do that. They weren't new lyrics, or rather, they did update one song, as is now traditional in almost every Gilbert and Sullivan, to make it topical. But that wasn't the problem. They added new text, new narrative, new book, and that was almost all quite poor. What I will say is that more or less all the new business was excellent. So they'd added a cabin boy, and he must have been about 9 if he was anything, and he could tap dance like a dream. So they gave him a lot of comedy, and they gave him a lot of tap dancing. So Act 2 opens with a rip-roaring medley, or fusion actually, of music by Sullivan from HMS Pinafore with hornpipes, and the boy and Captain Corcoran would do a double act tap dance and routine, and then all the sailors in the crew would come out and basically Busby Berkeley the whole thing. And what it did that magic thing of revitalising an audience into Act 2, because in any musical or in any show, people go to sleep after they had their ice cream. It's difficult to get people the energy back in an audience. This, goodness me, it was one of the best things I've seen in terms of getting an energy level up. And you don't think I'm going to see this in an opera house.
It's like Blow Gabriel Blow in Anything Goes.
It does exactly the same thing. Yes, exactly that. It's the big peppy number at the beginning of Act 2 that just gets everyone pulses racing, and then you can go into Act 2. So there's lots of really good stuff.
You can never often top that.
That is true, but sometimes you don't need to. Very often Act 2 is actually a downward slope anyway. I don't mean in critical terms, but obviously you're trying to come to a solution. So actually you've got to start, there's a difference between British farce and French farce. French farce is all about building up to a climax at the end of Act 1 and then putting the status quo back in Act 2, whereas a British farce builds up to a climax in Act 1 and then breaks it at the end of Act 2. And actually... this is about actually getting back to a status quo, not the status quo, but an a status quo. So I suppose in that sense, it's a French farce.
Whatever you want. Yeah.
But it's great. The performances were almost universally brilliant. There was one hole in the middle of it, and it's not his fault. The actors at the Coliseum are not mic'd. They're opera singers. All the Gilbert and Sullivan performers were opera singers. They all knew what they were doing. The chap who played Captain Corcoran was amazingly funny, talented. He could dance, he could sing, he had all the comedy.
Thank you.
He was top notch, and I'd see him in anything. But they cast Les Dennis, who's a very accomplished comedian, certainly knows how to act and sing. Certainly knows how to act and tell jokes. He isn't a born singer, and he certainly doesn't have opera lungs. And because he wasn't mic'd, you simply couldn't hear him in this enormous venue. And so Captain Corcoran and Sir Joseph Porter is an important character.
Now, I saw him in Hairspray.
Oh, yeah.
The summer before HMS Pinafore opened at the Coliseum. So he was also in the Coliseum. So maybe he was just hanging around.
Hairspray in the Coliseum?
Yeah.
Goodness.
But he could do that because he was mic'd.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, he wasn't for this.
He could sing, he could do the comic stuff. So maybe purely he could do it. You couldn't hear him.
Maybe it's because the rest of the cast were mic'd in Hairspray, whereas actually Gilbert and Sullivan performers are for the most part opera singers. So
now, do they often stunt cast the part that he was playing, or was that?
Well, let me give you the answer
to ask. Why was Les Dennis? Was Les Dennis?
That's easy for you to say. Yeah. I think it's because of Jonathan Miller's original casting for The Mikado, where they put Eric Idle in.
Okay, or Le Denny if you're French.
Yes, Les Denny is the sequel to Les Miserables. That's right. Eric Idle was in the original version of The Mikado in 1987. Let's say he never did it again.
It's quite late for Gilbert and Sullivan, 1987.
Never too late for Gilbert and Sullivan. But the point is that I think they were thinking you've got to have a big name, so they've gone for someone who is a household name in Britain. Unfortunately, not being able to hear him, he may have been putting in one of the best comic performances I've ever heard. I didn't hear a word. And the interesting thing was, it was then later televised on Sky Arts, and I watched it again, and I still couldn't hear him on that. Okay. They turned the mic up, they turned the recording mic up, not the one he was wearing, because he wasn't wearing one up, and you could still barely hear him, and you just think, oh, this reminds me of everything I liked about it and that I didn't like about it. That's it. I'm not going to talk about HMS Pinafore again, because it doesn't, in this episode, because
thank God for that.
It doesn't need to be pushed any further. It's lovely to see it in London, but actually the lesson I learned, and this will be the last word on it for me, is the fact that actually the further you go from Gilbert and Sullivan's text, the more you fall off a cliff. You can add business, but you shouldn't add anything else.
It's like Shakespeare. I mean, you don't add more Shakespeare.
Well, you don't. No, you're right. You don't. You think, I tell you what we really need here. We need a drawing room scene.
Yes. And you can't do satire better than they could.
Yes, and also they were, it's cohesive. They wrote all of it when they wrote it, and it's in the style they wrote it. And if you write it, it's very difficult to write in the style of a late Victorian.
It sounds camp as well.
Well, it does now.
Yeah.
But that's fine. That's a modern layering, and that's perfectly reasonable.
I love HMS Pinafore. I know it's the only Gilbert and Sullivan I know because I was in it at school, and
you were a little rating, giving it a large rating.
Well, I'd like to see it again, actually, just to be reminded of Will's wonderful songs, and I might understand the humour.
Well, watch the Sky version, because that is the version that I saw, and it'd be interesting how far it deviates from your memories. Interestingly, I don't know if the E&O is going to revive this, because what they appear to be doing is a different GNS every year, because I believe we're getting Yeoman this autumn, Yeoman of the Guard. And, as I say, last time we had Iolanthe, so I suspect they're working their way through.
Is there an order they're going through?
But it's not in chronological, if that's the question. No. You wait till I'm still waiting for Rudigal. But you're not going to beat the Opera North version of that. That was magnificent.
Okay. Well, thank you, Thos, for joining me for this lovely episode of Musical Talk.
Pleasure. Let's talk Gilbert and Sullivan for hours.
You're kind of off to Edinburgh, aren't you? Or you might have been to Edinburgh at this point. I don't know. But
let's just say Edinburgh coverage is a high expectation.
Yes, it's very exciting for you to get back there as well, because it's been a while. I hope you have had or do have a lovely time, Thos. This is a time...
What I want is yes to lovely time, no to COVID. Thank you.
Exactly. That's just life in general. Thank you so much for joining me again for
Pleasure,
Musical Talk. I shall speak to you soon. Thos shall speak to you soon. Until then, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Musical Talk. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk, you can visit our website at musicaltalk.co.uk, where you'll find all our episodes, or you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Musical Talk.